Good morning. So, Christine, how do you feel about being on again for a little while? For a bit this morning. Until everyone gets here. All right, we'll now reconvene the general session. Starting the public hearing? Yeah. Item 2H is the proposed amendments to Title V of the California Code. Oh, I'm sorry. Back up. Let's take roll.
Kirsten Barnes, Catherine Williams Brown, C. Michael Cooney, Lena Darling Hammond, Marisol Escobedo, Jose Gonzalez, Makita Grinnell Shire, Alicia Hine, Bonnie Klatt, Kevin Quinn, Monica Martinez, Castle Redmond, Ade Rodriguez, Ruth Rodriguez, Tina Salone, Christine Zeppos, Stephanie Papas. We short one for quorum.
Okay, so Christine Zeppos is going to fill that quorum for the morning. I will now open the public hearing. The Commission has one public hearing before it today. Item 2H is the proposed amendments to Title V of the California Code of Regulations pertaining to the single induction experience for new teachers. David Crable and Karen Sacramento will review the proposed amendments to the regulations and the response to the solicitation of public comment. Mr. Crable, please begin.
All right. Thank you. Good morning, members of the Commission. The public hearing in item 2H proposes Title V regulation amendments to implement policy decisions that were made at the December 2017 Commission meeting pertaining to providing a single induction experience for new teachers. At that December 2017 meeting, the Commission took action to approve proposed amendments to Title V regulations to support the teacher induction program preconditions and standards that were adopted by the Commission in October 2016. That includes a pathway creating that doesn't exist currently. And that's what's being created here in the proposed amendments. It would allow an educator who already holds a clear credential in one area, such as general education, to be granted a clear credential in a different credential area, such as special education, upon completion of the appropriate preliminary teacher preparation program, without being required to undergo the extra time and any related expense to complete an additional induction experience for that new credential area. In addition, item 2H includes proposed amendments that provide updates to the section of regulations regarding how educators qualify for an extension to the time of a credential. When Senate Bill 1209 went into effect January 1 of 2007, it added the requirement of completion of an induction program to teachers who were coming from outside of California, whether out of state or outside the United States. There were also amendments to Title V that became effective June 26, 2010, that included the sunset of California Level 2 programs and the transition to clear education specialist induction programs. So as a result, except for out-of-state teachers who have previous experience or meet the experience requirement, everyone now required to complete a commission-improved induction program. As a number of teachers found in the late 2000s, because of the economic circumstances, it became very difficult for many to find induction-eligible employment. At that time, the Commission took action and went into regulation, in fact, in February of 2009, to provide additional time, 2- and 3-year extensions for these California-prepared general education teachers who were faced with this situation. However, individuals who were prepared out of state or the education specialists were not included in this group. That change in regulations only applied to a specific group of California-prepared general education teachers. So as a result, those individuals were excluded from that option, even though many of them faced exactly the same type of economic and job-related problems. They were only limited to 1 year in induction. So now, even though they were required to do it, they were limited as far as how they could manage that situation. So the proposed amendments to Title V today take that 2- and 3-year language that's already in regulations out of that section, that's 80413, that applies only to California prepared teachers, and moves it to section 80523, which is a general section that regards extensions to credentials for across the board for educators. That barrier then would be removed for those persons who are required now to do induction, but may find themselves in similar types of circumstances as we've already seen. And so they would be allowed to be able to get those 2- and 3-year extensions if needed, because extensions, of course, are always subject to review. But nevertheless, that barrier would be gone, and they would have that opportunity then, if they needed extra time, to be able to complete that approved induction program, which they're now required to do. The Commission has received no personal or organizational responses, either in support or opposed to the proposed amendments, as noted in your agenda item. Staff recommends that the Commission adopt the amendments to Title V of the California Code of Regulations pertaining to providing a single induction experience for new teachers and the extension of time for credentials as presented in item 2H. Be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have no public comment cards. So, Commissioners, this is your chance to ask any questions or clarification for staff. Seeing none, we would like to have a motion to approve staff's recommendation. Okay, moved by Commissioner Rodriguez. Do we have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Kung. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next is item 21, multi-tiered system of support. Christine Olmstead from Orange County Department of Education and Terry Clark will present this item. Ms. Clark, would you please begin?
Good morning, Commissioners. As you know, we've been looking and updating a lot of our systems. We've done a lot of work in general education teacher preparation, and we're currently working still in special education teacher preparation. And so a number of staff last month were at a presentation at the department that Dr. Olmstead presented at, and so we asked if they could do a kind of a reprise of it here about MTSS. And so I'm going to turn this over to Kristen Wright from the California Department of Education. She's the Director of Special Education for our state, to do a little bit of an introduction and set the stage.
Good morning, Vice Chair and Commissioners. I'm Kristen Wright, Director of Special Education at the Department of Education. And I'm here today, very excited that you are hearing this presentation from Christine regarding multi-tier system of support. I am here to tell you that I am not here to say this is a special ed initiative and that we're really excited that this is about special ed, because it's really about each and every student in our state. And in order for us to truly realize the goals that we all collectively have sort of moved forward on around more inclusive practices for our students and an increase in least restrictive environment for our students with disabilities and all of our students with challenges, we look to a multi-tiered system of support framework to sort of set that foundation. So what I want to just tell you today and set the context is that we believe that great special education is built on great general education. And that tier one that Christine's going to talk about in general education, having our teachers that you've worked so hard to help figure out what they need in terms of preparation, ensuring that that tier one is universally designed, fully accessible, has all students in mind, is really going to set the stage for us in special education to do the kind of work that we need to do. So as we sit here today, I also want to remind you and let you know that MTSS is not a new iteration of RTI or RTI squared. MTSS is foundational. It's the way that you plan for systems around teaching and learning, and that we do this with great intention. And so I'm excited that as a state, and I want to commend you as the commission and Mary Sandy and Terry Clark and Linda and all the folks who've worked on these initiatives very collaboratively with us, that we're really getting some momentum. So we look forward to continuing to work in partnership with Orange County, who's doing some incredible work around this, and this has really caught its stride in the state. We're seeing a lot of positive things happening. So just here in solidarity, and to say that that we're looking forward to that foundation set for our teachers to come, because we know that nothing happens unless our teachers are able to fully access the instruction for our students and provide that kind of education for every single one of our kids, even our students with more significant disabilities. So thanks for having me, and thanks for having her.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So I'm Christine Olmsted. I'm the Associate Superintendent of Instruction for Orange County Department of Education. And just thank you for the work that you do. We are honored to have this gift and this trust that the state has put into us to scale a multi-tiered system of support across the state of California. So we're going to update you on the work that we've been doing for about the past 18 months and the work that we have still to do ahead of us. So I'm assuming you all can see the slides down there, right? So we're going to, what was that? Okay.
It's happening.
I can do this without slides, but I have a really cool video to show you. Right, well, while we're waiting for that, I'll just direct you to the two handouts that you have right now. So as Kristen said, we really do look at this as not RTI or PBIS on steroids, which sometimes you may hear. It is truly about a multi-tiered system of support framework. And really looking at, on this handout that I have for you here, looking at the bottom levels as really looking at all students, some students, and few students as universal, supplemental, and intensive supports that we need for all students or each and every child. One of the big takeaways I think people are getting out of the work that we've been doing for the past 18 months with our local districts is that in RTI and PBIS, a lot of times you'll hear people say our tier 1 kids or our tier 2 kids. And we're really adamant that kids aren't in tiers. Kids need universal supports, supplemental supports, and intensified support. So really that's the messaging we've been working on, as well as non-categorical language. So a lot of times now that our districts are in differentiated assistance, we'll hear, well, it's the foster youth kids that got us into differentiated assistance, or it's the special ed kids that got us into differentiated assistance. It's like, no, you need to take a pause and say it's not about kids who got you there. It's about your system that got you there. And so that's a lot of the work that we're trying to do right now is really just change mindsets about what it means to provide supports for students, and that we can't continue to blame kids for systems that we need to kind of update and work on. And so having that embedded into our teacher ed programs is really great. And seeing that MTSS is part of the new teacher performance expectations is amazing. What we're hearing out in the field, though, is that we have some great programs sending out teachers now with these new teaching performance expectations, and they're not finding schools yet that they're going into that have caught up yet. So we're working in tandem right now with that. And you'll see, actually, it's on here. If you go on the back, you'll see a map at the very bottom there of the way we've kind of started this work. And so with the Department of Education and the Department of Finance, the Orange County Department of Education received a $30 million allocation to scale multi-tiered system of support statewide. And we're doing that through a regional infrastructure. And so if we just start at the bottom of the map there with current status, what we did in the beginning is we actually trained through the CSESA regions. So there's 11 CSESA regions across the state. So those are our county superintendents of education. So we used our county offices as our first point of support, along with the Department of Education, and trained our region leads, and then as well as county office leads who provide professional learning to many of our school districts when it comes to multi-tiered system of support, or RTI or PBIS. And so we've been working on that. And if you see on that map, where we're at right now is that we've trained all 58 county offices and currently supporting 320 districts across the state. And so those numbers you see there on the map there show you how many LEAs we've been training across the state right now in a multi-tiered system of support. So if you look in this, the link there is clickable, so you can actually go in and see the districts and then the schools that we're working with. So as you're exiting teachers into the field now, you can kind of encourage them to go to these areas where, oh, what you've learned with your teacher performance expectations now match these districts we've been working with in the state of California. So that's good news. We just wrapped up applications. So we did the funding that we got, $21.5 million, had to go out to local districts to be able to scale their multi-tiered system of support. We did it in 3 cohorts. So in our first 2 cohorts, we have 320 applicants who we're working with. We just closed our 3rd cohort, and we have another 320 applicants in our 3rd cohort. That's our final cohort, but that doesn't mean we're done. So we have a lot of resources that we're putting online. We have county offices now that are trained who are able to provide this service. There's a professional learning institute this summer where any of you, it's here in Sacramento at the convention center. So an invitation will be coming to you about just attending sessions to learn more about that as well. And it looks like our slides are up. Can you see them now? Okay. So kind of to recap what I've said here, there's a video that we have that kind of just explains the premise of this work and where we got.
Education in California is moving in a new direction. One.
My master's degree is in educational technology, so. I was using somebody else's computer.
California is moving in a new direction, one where every student will be given the support and opportunity to thrive in the most inclusive learning environment. We have an amazing opportunity to transform our current educational landscape into one cohesive system that aligns all of our existing work on students' academic, behavioral, and social-emotional needs, along with new and innovative strategies to form a system that supports the whole child. The work of building a multi-tiered system of support needs to be grounded in a framework that engages our families and communities, empowers strong and engaged leaders, integrates our educational programs so that all students participate in the curriculum and activities of their peers, and promotes inclusive policies and practices. In March of 2016, the state of California created a grant with just this purpose. The California Sums Initiative is designed to catapult this work forward and scale up MTSS efforts in districts and schools throughout California. To reach this incredible goal, we all need to get involved, and find ways to make MTSS work for us. You are the architects and master planners that will make this a reality for California. There's no time to waste. How will you help build MTSS?
Okay, we don't want to play that again. Okay. Go this way. Okay, so when you're given, is this still on? Okay, so when you're given $30 million to scale up an initiative across the state of California, you need to bring in partners to help you do that. And so as we looked at presenting our application to Department of Education and Department of Finance, we looked where in the field could we get support. And so the Swift Education Center out of the University of Kansas had already created a lot of MTSS resources and tools and had been working in 5 states already. And because we didn't want to start from scratch and we knew that we needed to get this going quickly, we brought them in to be partners with us in this project. And so we've been using the Swift framework and then kind of have massaged it to become the California way, to actually make it useful for our educators in California. Part of the grant application also asked us to work with rural California. And I live in Orange County. I live in Yorba Linda, which some people may consider rural, but really it's not. So I've been up to Berry Creek, and it's not Yorba Linda. So definitely we counted on our partners at the Butte County Office of Education who know a lot about rural California, especially that 40% of our schools across the state are in rural parts of the state. So through our partnerships, we've been working on scaling this statewide. We do this through what we call whole system engagement. And so really using the county, the region, and the state as the source of technical support for our districts. Our districts really need to be the point of intervention. So the first place we've started working is with our districts. We needed to make sure our districts were all on board and they had systems in place to actually support their schools because we know schools are the place of transformation. But I've had experiences, and you may have all had experiences, that if your district does not support what your site principals are doing or your site teachers are trying to do, or it's kind of like, oh, go pilot this here and you try this here, and it's not a collective effort, things fall apart when those people leave because the systems aren't built to support it. So we're really talking about systems change and systems support to really help our schools and our teachers and our families, because that is the purpose of our work, right? Our schools are the place of transformation that support the students and the families and the communities that we serve. So we've really built our infrastructure for scaling a multi-tiered system of support this way. Just, you all probably know this well, but I had to highlight it, that beginning teachers must understand the principles of universal design for learning and MTSS and apply these principles in the content fields of their credentials to plan instruction that meets individual student needs for all students. So important, and it's the work that we're really focused on doing right now in making sure that we have scaled a multi-tiered system of support across the state. So this probably looks a little bit different from graphics you may have seen in the past with RTI or PBIS. A lot of times we see triangles, and a lot of times we'll see percentages, right? So 80% of our kids should make it in universal supports, and then 20% might need supplemental or an individualized support. This graphic here purposefully doesn't put percentages, programs, or students into it. It's all students need universal supports. Some students need supplemental supports, and a few students need individual supports. Sometimes. Never know when. Could be my own kids who, are in high school. They don't have special needs, but sometimes they need supplemental and intensified supports because of anxiety they might be having or different issues they might be having. So it's for all kids, each and every child. And we do this through universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, and integrated content service and delivery. And if you look at this graphic, sometimes what you'll see in other systems that aren't part of a multi-tiered framework is that you may wait to do differentiated instruction when you get to that next level. Well, differentiated instruction should be when we're lesson planning, we're looking at each and every child and what they need. And as we're doing universal design for learning, what differentiation needs to happen as we're doing that. But when they move to supplemental support, you should still be applying those principles in supplemental support as well. And when they need individualized support, you should still be applying all those principles in individualized support as well. So that's kind of the messaging and what we're doing here. And so you'll see this graphic here that PBIS and RTI squared fit under an MTSS framework. So although they're both also tiered interventions of support, one's for academics, one's for behavior. But you can't do one exclusive of the other. So in schools where we've seen people try to implement PBIS, but maybe they haven't had good academic interventions or supports or universal supports even in place, it fails because we know behavior, social emotional learning, and academics all need to go hand in hand. And it has to be done to support the whole child. And so that umbrella of MTSS is what brings your systems together. And we need to know that we have to do social emotional learning, academics, and behavior all together to support the whole child. We've done a lot of work to make sure that the work we've been doing with our districts gets embedded into LCAPs. And so you'll see here an MTSS and LCAP crosswalk. And the disheartening thing is when I go out to school sites and I ask teachers, have you read your LCAP? Most of them don't even know what their LCAP is, or they have had no influence on their LCAP. It's shameful because we're writing LCAPs for people who are doing the work with no input into what the LCAP is saying. And so this is really important, I think, as we work with our teachers and our administrators, that they be advocates for what we're saying is going into an LCAP to make their school the place of transformation. So this is a crosswalk that we use with our districts and our schools to show them how MTSS fits into an LCAP framework, or how MTSS fits into the LCAP. And it really is about the big buckets, the conditions of learning, engagement, and pupil outcomes. In a multi-tiered system of support, we talk about inclusive learning environments. In engagement, we talk about families and community members have to be partners in our work. And in pupil outcomes, that every child is provided social, emotional, behavior, and academic supports. And it fits exactly into what the LCAP is asking us to do too. So if we use MTSS as our driver to support the LCAP, we should be seeing great results for kids. So this is the framework. You have that on the back of we call this our placemat. So this is the framework that we've used in development with the Swift Center. And when we worked with the Swift Center, they actually didn't have social emotional instruction yet in their multi-tiered system of support. They had it kind of under behavior instruction. And so in California, we've actually pulled it out because social emotional learning is a little bit different than behavior. And so we wanted to really put an emphasis on social emotional learning and how restorative practices kind of fit into the two. So restorative practices really help build social emotional learning, but they also help build behavior expectations as well, but they're not one and the same. And so social emotional learning actually is embedded into academic instruction, behavior instruction, and its own piece as well. Because if we don't have healthy minds, then our behaviors and our academics don't work. So in order for all of that to work, you also have to have strong administrative leadership, integrated educational frameworks, family and community engagement, and inclusive policy structures and practices. Without these foundational domains and features, your MTSS system will not work. And so we really work with our districts to make sure that they understand all the parts of the system that need to be in place in order for a multi-tiered system of support to work. So this is the placemat that we use with our districts. We go into 6 days of training, communities of practice, evidence-based decision-making, and them providing us evidence that learning about these things is actually making a difference for students. And so we'll be providing a report in the next year to Department of Finance and the State Board on what we've seen in the last year. A lot of our tools and resources we can get from swiftschools.org. They're completely free and open source. So if you want to look at those yourself, we use their resources and tools that they've provided to us. They originally had a grant through the Federal Department of Education for creating a multi-tiered system of support for more inclusive education. So all of their resources are free. So we've been able to take their free resources and then kind of make them California. But if you kind of want to see the work that we've been doing with them, it's a plethora of information on there to get great resources. One of the things we use to assess, and it's a self-assessment for schools to use, is called the FIA. It's the Fidelity Integrity Assessment. And it allows schools to look at where they're at with a multi-tiered system of support. And so they do a self-assessment for them to see how are they doing with inclusive behavior instruction? How are they doing with inclusive academic instruction? Do they really have strong leadership teams? Do they really engage their families the way they say they do? And it's a self-assessment that lets them see growth over time. So they're supposed to do it twice a year, kind of once in the beginning of the year, once at the end of the year, to see after implementing what they've learned about MTSS, are they seeing changes in their system? And it's about systems change. It's not about implementation of curriculum or anything. I mean, that's in there too, but it's really about what have we done to change our systems to support our families and our students. So again, it's a self-assessment. It's administered through structured conversations, and here's just kind of, it supports all the domains and features that you see on the placemat here. And it's really based on implementation science. And so as districts and schools go to look at their system of support, they look at, are they just laying the foundation? Are they thinking about it? There's no formal plans in place yet, but they might be thinking about it. Or are they starting to install, that they have a plan in place and they're on their way towards implementation? Or you get to implementation where you're working on the school-wide application, lots of components are in place, or you have full sustainability where you're using kind of that plan, do, study, act cycle to constantly look for continuous improvement, and you're adjusting along the way. So when we're looking at implementation science, anything like this takes 3 to 5 years to get to the point of sustainability. And when you're looking at 5 domains and 11 features of a multi-tiered system of support, you're not going to get all of them done in 3 to 5 years. You really want to hone in and focus and be really good at 1 or 2 for 3 to 5 years while you're still moving the other ones along. But then you'll take the assets that you've learned from the ones that you've really developed and apply those then to the other ones that need strengthening. But keep it focused is the message that we try to send our districts that we work with. This is just an example of some of the ways if you were out kind of in the cycle of continuous improvement, how you would be rating yourself a 3. So if you were looking at academic supports, you would have multi-tiered instructional systems available to all students regardless of eligibility. So if we think about universal supports, a lot of times our students who have eligibility for different reasons, whether they're English learners, students with disabilities, they get removed from the classroom rather than included in the classroom. And so a lot of this work is around what can we do to be more inclusive and provide supports within the classroom and only pull out when necessary. Research-based curriculum is absolutely needed. A lot of work around collaboration time or co-teaching between specialized educators as well as general educators. I loved hearing that kind of dual credential now. That's awesome. Research-based interventions promoting skills that are matched by type and intensity, and that your school leadership team, and this is key, is schools need to have a school leadership team made up of family members, staff, para-educators, the principal, so that you really have different lenses looking at, are we really doing this effectively? So that's a big component. Just another way to look at it is, are we applying UDL? Are we using flexible grouping and differentiated instruction? Are we monitoring what we say we're doing? And that we actually use the data for continuous improvement purposes. And then again, you can look at it from behavior prevention as well, universal supports, the team monitoring students' behavior progress, and that we have systems in place to track progress. And then interventions as well, that they're research-based and they're clear. They include prevention strategies, not just intervention strategies, and that they're regular reviewed. And then that you have database decision making, and that it's done at least 3 times a year. You're monitoring student progress, and that you have a data system in place that's easily accessible for our teachers. That's really sometimes one of our systems issues that we need to fix, is having a data system that is accessible for teachers to actually track data and kind of see growth over time for their students. This is the map I was referring to earlier. This is where we've been working. So as our new teachers are going out into the field, you can see places that are implementing an MTSS framework. Now, most of them are just in the laying foundation stage, but they could tell you what a multi-tiered system of support is and how RTI and PBIS fit into a multi-tiered system of support and how other resources actually nest into an MTSS framework. And so when I talk about other resources, we have a lot of districts who will write, all kids will be college and career ready. And they might have college and career ready initiatives or resources that they're using. That should nest within an MTSS framework too. It shouldn't be separate of. So everything should nest into the framework under that umbrella. And then the last thing I have to share with you is that we will be up here in Sacramento, July 24th through the 26th. You are all invited to attend. We are doing our National MTSS Professional Learning Institute. We had our first one last year. It was in Anaheim or Costa Mesa, and this year we'll be at the Sacramento Convention Center. So over 1,000 people attended last year, and we're looking forward to having that many attend this year. But hot off the press, we are also having an Institute of Higher Education strand for innovation configuration maps for California MTSS. And Dr. Paul Sindelar from the Cedar Center and Dr. Wayne Saylor from the Swift Education Center will be hosting that and taking our higher ed folks through that process of looking at innovation configuration maps for their programs at their education programs. So that's what I have for you. Do you have any questions?
Thank you so much for that very informational presentation. I have one public comment card. Danette Brown, can you please come up and state your name and affiliation for the record?
Hi. Well, that's a good public comment card. I'm safe.
Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. I couldn't help myself, Christine. I'm a proud teacher in La Habra City School District in Orange County Department of Ed. And I wasn't planning on speaking to this. Yes, rural. And I just felt compelled to come up and speak as an individual and as a teacher who is part of a district leadership team that is in cohort 1 of the SUMS initiative. And I've been teaching for 23 years. And in education, I know that sometimes our research and theory is difficult to connect to practice. That's not the case with this MTSS and the SUMS initiative. As a teacher, the power that we've seen as a district for beginning this transformational change has been that bullet number 2 on the placemat under the social emotional learning, academic, and behavioral, and that's teams. What this SUMS initiative has allowed our district to do is they've provided the training. They've given us the structure to implement the way that's best for La Habra City School District. So we've been given the resources, but we've also been given the freedom and the flexibility to determine what are the needs of our students. And those teams that we've developed, we have our district leadership team, and then we have site leadership teams. And the thing that I appreciate as an educator is the respect and the flexibility to really say, our students in La Habra or our students at Las Lomas Elementary School, here's what we need to do, and here's how we believe our pathway to achieve that might look like. So I just wanted to get up and say, yay! This is one of those things where the research and the theory, the structure that's been set up through this initiative is really impacting practice. And I'm excited at the work that we're doing at the local level. I'm excited about how engaged our teacher leaders are being a part of this team because they feel like this initiative is worth their time and effort. They don't mind doing the sub-plans to go to these meetings in my district because they know something comes of it and that it's really impacting instruction for our students in the positive. So if you ever want to have a break time conversation about what this looks like in a district that's doing the work, I would be so happy to chat with you. And it's kind of funny that I fly all the way to Sacramento to see my friend who lives 10 miles from my house.
I promise I did not plant her. I had no clue she was coming. That is awesome.
I almost sent you an email, but
I'm glad you did it. This is such a surprise.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danette. I have no other public comment cards. Commissioners, this is your chance for questions or comments. Go ahead. Commissioner Martinez.
Hi. Sorry I'm late. Sorry I was late. Can you tell me a little bit more exactly what our teacher was talking about, the training that you all do? It sounds like it's a little turnkey or you give the resources. So can you describe the training that you do with the county or the district level?
Can I actually pull up the slides or the website?
Yeah.
Oh, no, we have our own. So it's camtss.org. This is the foundation's training that they go through. And so, oh, is it not projecting? Oh, okay. Sorry. But anyways, I'll while it's coming up, I'll talk. So it's 5 days of training, it's 2 of the days are back to back. So but it's 4 different workshops. Just to get the introduction in place, you need kind of 2 days to do it. And so we do foundations of MTSS. So just, what is your why? We really talk about why are you in education? Why do you do what you do? And when we talk about each and every child, and our tagline is all means all, what does that mean to you? And really kind of getting that talk into the learning space about why this work is important and why a multi-tiered system of support is just so needed for us to do the crucial work that we do with our students. And we really talk about how it is different than PBIS or RTI and how those things nest within the framework, but really it's about this systems change that we're talking about. Usually the trainings are about 4 to 6 weeks apart because we have them kind of learn something when they come to Foundations of MTSS. They go back and they practice with it, and then they come back 4 to 6 weeks later and they get the next dose. And so it's pretty much a 6-month to 12-month training, depending on how our regions have set it up. And so then they'll come back to training 2, where we'll really talk about them transforming or structuring their MTSS. They look at teaming, they look at priority and practice planning, and they look at resource mapping. So they'll use their LCAPs actually, and they'll use their school site plans. And they'll kind of look to say, what resources do we already have to support the work that we want to do? And what's missing? So what are our opportunities? What are our gaps? What are our strengths? And they really work on kind of mapping that out and creating a plan for what are they going to do the following year, or what are they going to do immediately when they see some of these gaps come up. Then we move into engineering your MTSS, where we really talk about resources for all students and being equitable. And so an example of that is one of our districts that we work with, they have an international baccalaureate program. And so really, if you looked at that, that would be for some or few students, right? But they really looked at the profile of an IB student, and they said, what of an IB student should we make universal for all kids? And so they really took that apart and made that universal supports, and every teacher, every period, every day, make sure that profiles of an IB student are now available for all kids. We'll look at that sometimes with gifted and talented education. Sometimes if you're in gifted and talented education, you get to learn and use depth and complexity icons. Well, why aren't we using those for all kids? Those are just good teaching strategies. So we start to look at what are some of the really good practices we have in place that are just good teaching, and let's make that universal and not selective so that all students have access to high quality instruction. And then advancing your MTSS really helps them kind of move on after they're finished with the training. They'll have a plan of action to keep moving this deeper. Once they're finished with the facilitated training, they move into a community of practice. And so those are facilitated online, and they meet once a month based on one of the domains and features on the placemat to dig deeper and share resources about what they're doing locally. So Jeanette could probably come back up here and talk about that. They'll get online. They all have access to upload files. They share resources about what they're doing, and that goes on, we hope, forever. The grant does end in 2020. They have to provide us data through 2020, but we're hoping this is just part of the system, that just because the funding goes away doesn't mean this goes away, right? This is supposed to be about systems change and system engagement, and that's the whole goal, is building our system so new resources can be put towards it using LCFF dollars.
Please, Commissioner Zeppos.
Well, it's wonderful to see you here and to see this work advancing. I think you know many of us in the IHE world have been working on this with the CEDAR group led by Director Clark in many very comprehensive ways. I love the handouts that you have, and especially with the map, because you're right. We do send a lot of our candidates out that are in districts or in schools where the skills that they have, they're not able to implement. Yeah. So are we able to get this electronically to disseminate to our university, the private nonprofits, and I suspect the UCs and CSU?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that'd be really useful to try and get our candidates places where they can use those immediately.
Yep.
And then for the summer, I think it's so great to have the workshop, but you may know that university faculty aren't necessarily around in July. So perhaps we could work with you to have a similar kind of workshop in the fall or
Absolutely.
other times where faculty might be more available. I think that would be wonderful to do that as well.
Absolutely. And our hope with that one is, even if faculty are still kind of off, but they're around, it's just bringing kind of a leadership team together.
Okay.
And so we'll be sending out an actual flyer to IHEs, so you can kind of look at that and put together your team to send them just to that specific strand. But we do understand that too.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Executive Director.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here, both Kristen Wright and Christine. This is, I think this is one of the most exciting things we're doing around changing the way we think about what happens in schools and how it happens for kids. I so appreciate your comments earlier about not holding the kids responsible for the outcomes of, in terms of accountability, that it is a systems issue. And to bring MTSS right into the room where we sit and work on standards all the time is part of the system, I think, and bringing some coherence to it it's a very exciting moment for us. I'm reminded daily by the person sitting right next to you that MTSS is really, it's not a special ed program.
No.
It's a general ed program. It's how we organize services to all students in the schools. You're nodding so clearly. I've understood what you've said, and I'm beginning to absorb it well. I think, however, as we've been going very deep in special education. We redid the work on the Gen Ed TPEs, and it was delightful to see that in your presentation. But to really focus on what strong Tier 1 instruction in an included frame looks like, that's been a major part of our work for the last 4 years here. And coming along kind of in sequence now is the work on what we do with education specialists and how we think about their work in this type of frame. And I would love to hear the two of you, both Kristen and Christine, reflect with us on how you see the role of education specialists playing out in this system in ways that are the same or really different than the way it's currently been structured. It would just be helpful to hear your thoughts about this as we move forward. We've adopted a new structure for the Ed Specialist credential that has a common core trunk of preparation for Gen Ed and Special Ed together, with branches into the areas of service that kids need their teachers to be expert in. We're talking after this item about what the subject matter foundation for that should be or could be. And in June, we'll be talking about what the specific performance expectations for the specialists ought to be and what the authorizations for the credential ought to be. So this is very timely for us to broaden our perspective to, if this is the frame we're moving to across the state, what do we need to think about relative to the role of the specialist in this environment?
You can go first.
So I think we're seeing the ed specialist as also a great general practitioner and to ensure that ed specialists, recognizing that our goal as a state is to have each and every student have the greatest access to their general education curriculum, peers, and classroom, but also recognizing that there will be situations where special education teachers, ed specialists, will be teaching classes of special ed students. And while we are 100% committed to having the most inclusive settings for the majority of our students, we also have to recognize that there may be places where, or situations where ed specialists will be spending all day and will be responsible for core instruction. And so from the build, and you, again, you're all on your way to doing this, having our ed specialists have all those foundational teaching skills. I'm one of those that has the ed specialist mod severe credential that was a lot shorter, and it was a great program, but we did not get the breadth and depth of the gen ed training to be able to really truly, I believe, manage an entire classroom, especially of the most challenged students. So if you think about it from a logic perspective, you would want your teachers who were challenged with the most, the students with the highest needs, to be foundationally the most well-trained. And so I guess my plea would be to not be so worried about time and be more worried about the depth of knowledge and instruction that our ed specialists have to be sent out there into a myriad of situations. And again, we're aiming somewhere as a state to have, great, accessible, universal design for learning general ed classrooms, but we're not there yet. And so what we're seeing is, and I was at an IEP recently where the choice for the family of a child who'd been included all the way up to middle school was for them to go into a gen ed classroom. But that gen ed classroom in middle school was 36 kids and a teacher who didn't have much space and maybe lab once every couple of weeks. So that delivery was that traditional in front of the classroom delivery. I think we're moving towards a model where we want to see much more multisensory approaches to education. And I think we're headed there. But so I think we're going to have a transition time where we have to recognize that we're moving towards this direction, but we still have the reality of today. And it would be a disadvantage for our ed specialists not to have the full breadth and depth of instructional training and knowledge and pedagogy across all the domains, because we still see a lot of schools who are trying to move towards more inclusion. But again, we're at about 46%, 48% of our students with disabilities spending 80% or more of their time in general ed. So that's a lot of special day classes still in place. So I think it's to our advantage. And I know we've talked about this, Mary, as we've gone out to see great examples of very inclusive settings, that those general ed and special ed teachers work hand in hand with the same depth of knowledge. You just have those ed specialists with that extra specialty knowledge, like you would if you went to, a neurosurgeon after you went to your general practitioner and your neurologist. So
let me say two places where it needs to. Not only in the ed specialists, but also in our administrative preparation programs as well.
Yep.
And when I look at this, I look at inclusive policy structure and practice. And one of the things we need to make sure we teach our ed specialists, our general educators, and our administrators that they are advocates for students. And co-teaching is by far and away the best inclusive setting for all kids. To have an ed specialist with their deep knowledge, co-teaching with a gen ed kid and all kids being included is good for all kids. And so that's where we need to move, and that's where we need to advocate. We also really need to do a lot of work around growth mindset and what all of our students are able to do. And if we have people in either general education or special education who don't have growth mindsets, we need to work them out of the field because it's not okay for kids. Kids do not stall Kids have abilities that we don't even know they have, and if we don't expose them to various environments and other people, if we're keeping them self-contained all day long, or we're keeping our gen ed kids from experiencing the beauties that a lot of our special needs kids have, we're doing a disservice to everybody. And so that's where I think we really need to kind of just teach our educators coming up through the system. And the ones that are coming up now like to advocate. So let's get them advocating, right? And let them actually, you know, if they get onto a campus and somebody's saying, I'm going to stick you in a classroom for 80% of the day to teach kids and you only get to take them out for PE and dance and the Art Masters program, say, no, that's not okay. Can I find a teacher who wants to work with me and we're going to do this together? So that's where we need to move the system, is advocacy. And we need to teach we need to teach our teachers and our administrators to be advocates for our kids.
I don't know when we've had audience applause before. That was exciting. We have two more. I see Commissioner, who was first? Commissioner Escobedo, go ahead.
So from Orange County to a teacher in Butte County, I'm as excited as you are. My school actually had their first MTSS workday last week. And one of the most powerful things that I saw within these past few weeks was just the collaboration. It facilitates the collaboration to build these strong teacher teams for the advocacy that you're talking about. And I can't wait to see it, 3, 5, and years from now and beyond. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Klatt?
Just a quick comment. Thank you so much. This is very exciting to see this. And I just wanted to express appreciation for, you said that when you brought it to California, you separated out the social emotional instruction piece and made that really a focus area. And I just appreciate that so much. So thank you for this work. And I'm very excited.
I too really appreciate this, and the presentation was excellent. I would have been clapping too if I was in the audience. A couple of things that stood out for me, kids aren't changing, just the way that we're viewing them and how they best learn is what is changing for us. And so one of the things, in my experience as a teacher, we've had so many programs that come and they're the next new thing, and then we all get trained on it, and then it goes away before we even ever start implementing it. So I like looking at this, seeing that it's not a program, that it's a system. I just recently finished reading Michael Fullen's book, Coherence, which is all about setting up systems. So that was great. I really appreciated the parent community engagement piece, the whole district support piece. I have teachers still who have set up really great programs, but then they've left the district and those programs have just gone away completely. So, we did RTI and we did PBIS separately in the district that I recently worked in. And RTI was probably the worst thing that we ever did to our kids, because they separated them out. They leveled the entire school, and you could hear kids chanting, I'm in the dumb group, I'm in the smart group. And they would have whole classrooms full of students who were all leveled, and they knew what level they were at. And it really affected them. My own children would come home saying, why am I in the, average group? My so-and-so is in the high group, or so-and-so is in the low group. So they would know that was going on. So really important that that piece is going away. And we had kind of a similar problem with the PBIS. PBIS stood on its own, and it was only the bad kids that were having to do check-in, check-out, or, so they knew, I'm a trouble kid, I'm a bad kid, I have to go to my check-in teacher in the morning, but nothing was done together. So looking at this is really positive. I'd love not seeing it as a program that's going to go away, but rather as a new system that's going to stay in place. So thank you so much.
Can I make one more quick comment?
Mm-hmm.
I would be remiss, and I hear Maureen and Vicki Graff in the background of my mind saying, don't forget to mention that this is really the dream of the Special Ed Task Force, is that this foundationally would come to fruition and that we would have something like this to build from in special education. And so this whole idea of having this initiative and the state really sinking their teeth into it. Orange County has really taken the ball and run with it. And so on behalf of the state, we really want to thank Christine and her team for what they've taken and moved forward, and the Swift Center as well, because it's a real thing, and we have a placemat, and we have and I don't, it was a lot of hopes and dreams. So the other piece I just wanted to quickly mention is that we sort of use all of this as a litmus test for all of the initiatives and other things that we're doing now. So I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention that as we're thinking about all these, the credentialing pieces moving forward, that the preschool piece around credentialing is also going to be a really critical piece in how we think about preschool and inclusive preschool, because as Christine mentioned, the changing the culture and climate of that all kids do truly belong is also something that as a state we are still struggling with. And that whole each and every scenario is like, you really mean each and every? Yes, every single student, even our students with the most significant disabilities. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you. And also, I wanted to highlight when you said about the co-teaching with the special ed teachers and general ed teachers, that's something that's pretty new that's happening. And I really hope that more districts kind of allow their teachers or give them the freedom to try that out, because that really is something that is working with in areas that they're doing it. So thank you so much. Any other comments? All right, this is an information item, so no action is needed. Thank you all so much. Let's take a 7-minute break and come back at, I should put my glasses on, 9:40. Thank you.
Oh, I was throwing my voice. Ventriloquism school is paying off. Good morning. I'd like to reconvene the Educator Preparation Committee. We have 2 remaining items this morning. Item 3E is appropriate content knowledge requirement for special education candidates, which falls in nicely with the presentation we just had. The item is being presented by William Hattrick and Sarah Solari Colombini. This is an information action item. Ms. Colombini, will you please begin?
Sure, thank you. And what a nice segue as we heard about systems change in school districts and schools. And that leads us to the systems change that we're affecting in credentialing that this commission began probably over a year and a half ago. But in February, you adopted a new credential structure with 5 initial credentials. And so today we bring to you this item 3E, and we really just touch on one small piece here. It's appropriate content knowledge, the content knowledge requirement. And so today, item 3E presents the options that you have for the content knowledge requirements for special education teachers for your consideration and potential action. As I mentioned at the February meeting, you adopted 5 initial credentials for the special education credential. And now that that structure has been determined, some additional parameters need to be established with respect to the credential. Specifically, what is the appropriate content knowledge for the ed specialist credential holders in California? So this item presents what historically has been required of education specialist candidates, in addition to the current trends of how education specialist candidates are currently meeting content knowledge requirements, which is on page 4 of the item. If you scroll forward to that. It is important to note that once a special education teacher has satisfied content knowledge in an approved area, that teacher is authorized to teach in any content area. It is a K-22 credential. So this item, we'll get right to the meat of it, presents 3 options for the Commission's consideration. The first option, and I'm referring now just to bring you to it, to Table 4, which is on page 6. The first option is to maintain the current requirements. And so those are candidates who currently seek a credential. They have to satisfy content knowledge either as a multiple subject candidate does, which is they take either the multiple subject CSET or they complete an elementary subject matter approved program, or as a single subject candidate does in the content areas of English, math, science, social studies, art, music, physical education, or world language. The second option is to allow special education teaching candidates to meet the multiple subject content knowledge requirement or single subject content knowledge requirement in a more limited number of content areas. So you could limit the single subject areas to just English, math, social studies, and science, and then still have that multiple subject requirement area, so the multiple subject CSET or an elementary subject matter approved area. And then the third option that you could consider would be to just require all special education teachers to meet the multiple subject requirement, which is either the multiple subject CSET or an elementary subject matter approved program. So that's the third option. So staff is really requesting right now commission input and direction regarding the appropriate content knowledge for special education teachers in California. And with that, we'll entertain any discussion or questions.
Okay, we do have a comment from a member of the public. Danette Brown, would you please come up?
Good morning, Danette Brown representing the California Teachers Association. When we were looking at this item, I have a question, and then I'm going to just make some comments, and maybe the question could be clarified after my comments. I was unclear regarding Table 4 because option number 1, elementary plus 8 content areas, I see that the second bullet says this is the current requirement, so no regulations would need to be promulgated. In that same column down under option 3, it says this is currently the most often used pathway for candidates seeking an ed specialist credential. So I was a little unclear about what that meant because option 3 says that they would need new regs, but is it the pathway that most candidates use? I was just confused by that statement in both options. So having said that, we can kind of deal with that question in a minute. I think that anything we do in this area with the ed specialist credentialing, we need to be mindful of the context that we're working in right now, where this has been a shortage area, an area of significant need. And we would like to see the option that has the most flexibility, that would keep that pipeline as broad as possible to get people that are interested in this area into the profession. We also understand that we want candidates to have a foundational understanding of these content areas. We also understand they have a bachelor's degree and other things, that build that foundation. So as far as our understanding currently right now, without having that question answered, we would probably be in support of option 1 because it appears to be the most flexible that would have the most opportunity for candidates to come in. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Having no other public comment cards, we'll open it up to the commissioners and hear your thoughts on this item. And yes, thank you.
So in response to the question, so anytime there's a change, which option 3 would be a change, so we would close the single subject option, there would need to be a change to regulations. So that's why, although it does mention in the third box that most education specialist candidates do meet their subject matter requirement through the multiple subject route, that's why it says that there. That's how most candidates do meet the content knowledge requirement. We would be closing down, if you chose option 3, we'd be closing down those single subject routes for candidates. So it would require a change in regulations. So that's
Okay, hopefully that helped. And we will continue with commissioner comments. Opening up the floor. Does anyone have a comment on this item? Okay.
To me, the option 1 and 2 seem, I think I have wrapped my head around those. It's option 3. Could you explain a little bit more what option 3 would entail in terms of what would happen in the traditionally single subject school, so like middle school and high school? How can you, is my question making sense? If you could just explain what that would look like for middle and high schools if we went with option 3, who would be teaching those classes?
So that special ed credential, because it's K through 22, would be taught by an education specialist who, if option 3 were chosen, would only have the multiple subject or elementary subject matter waiver as their content. But as you can see at the bottom of page 5, it covers all of those different areas there. So they would be teaching potentially in self-contained classes in high school, the self-contained core areas of math, science, English, and social science with that multiple subject only.
So to clarify then, and I think this is still true, right, that a teacher with that credential now, that wouldn't change then, right? So currently, could a teacher with a specialist credential teach, let's say, a higher math class without having that? Sorry, I'm making this so much more complicated than it is.
Yes, for the students who have an IEP. Before, with No Child Left Behind, the guidelines were different, because then the teacher did have to have that content knowledge as well. But now that No Child Left Behind is no longer in effect, as long as the students in their class have an IEP with math goals on it, and they have that multiple subject, then they could teach that self-contained class. And hopefully are getting, if they need it, the teacher's able to access content instruction when they need that help from perhaps a general ed math teacher, that kind of thing.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So basically option 3 is basically a response almost to No Child Left Behind going away, so that we can do option 3 now and that we couldn't really before? Is that, am I starting to sort of, no, I'm not getting it yet.
Well, option 3 just broadly prepares the teacher, excuse me, an ed specialist teacher. It provides the most broad preparation and content for all ed specialist teachers. Okay, so because if you look at option 3 on the bottom of page 5, as William referred you to, it has the broadest content preparation for all ed specialist teachers. So one would argue very, very appropriate for K through 8, right? When you get to high school, that's where it gets a little bit more tricky. So, but the teacher is still, an ed specialist teacher is only authorized to teach students with IEPs, correct? So any student with an IEP, that teacher may teach. Their content area, as long as they've satisfied their content area in any content area right now, because that's what they can teach, any subject. So it doesn't matter if they've satisfied their content area in, let's just say, English literature. They can still teach a student with an IEP biology, okay, because NCLB's gone away, right? So maybe what some current thinking is that if everyone were to meet the multiple subject content preparation, they would at least be broadly prepared in the subjects that you see, the reading, language, literature, history, social studies, science, math, PE, human development. And so they'd have this smattering of content preparation that may be appropriate for K-12. I'm not. So I'm just giving you some information. Yeah.
Commissioner Hind.
I have also a clarifying question based off of what Commissioner Cloud was asking. So in high school right now, if a student has an IEP and needs to take a math class, where do they go for a math class? Do they go to the regular general ed class, or do they go to a special ed class, or how does that work?
That depends on their IEP, and where their IEP team feels that their needs can best be met. It could be in a general education class. It could be in a general education class with some type of resource support, or it could be in a self-contained class. And if you'll remember back to December when we had that survey results of special education teachers in this state, we do still have a fair amount of teachers who are in those self-contained settings. I don't think it was broken out between elementary and secondary, but that's the case right now. And that sort of dovetails to what Kristen was mentioning, Kristen Wright, with where we are right now and wanting to be aware of that as we make these decisions with credentialing and where we'd like to move toward with MTSS. But as of today, there are still self-contained classes for students with IEPs in the core academic areas.
I can tell you from personal experience as a secondary site administrator who had met, special education students on our campus, we did place our students in Algebra 1 and geometry classes, and then they would have study skills classes as support. So they were in the general education math classes with a support class. So,
point helpful to dig just a little deeper on that point. And it goes to the question of what service and support do we need the ed specialist to provide a secondary student in mathematics, right? Is it about study skill? Is it sometimes, right? Is it about having different ways of learning this content because they're not getting it the straight ahead way that the math teacher's teaching it? Are they going to be getting that in an SDC type of class or what? So, and if it's all of the above, how much math does that specialist need to have in order to do that job effectively is the question. And does because the argument around option 3 is if a specialist can be assigned to support students in any area of the curriculum, then you might want to make sure they have exposure to all areas of the curriculum. You could argue that a baccalaureate degree gives them exposure to all areas of the curriculum in some way, shape, or form, but whether they're able to draw that in and make it applicable to their teaching is another thing, right? So how much math do they need to know? Is an elementary level sufficient? And does the math preparation for an elementary subject matter verification just get limited to 8th grade math, or does it typically address a broader scope, but we're capturing the multiple subject scope? Am I making sense? Or yeah?
Yes, you are.
Well, I'll talk a little to my own experience, and that was as a special education teacher who did the multiple subjects CSET. And started off teaching elementary, self-contained class, multiple grade levels, and then went to high school to teach math. And at the time, it was a resource class, but all the students had an IEP, and it was self-contained. And I was teaching up through Algebra 2, so Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. And I did well in math in high school, so I was maybe more qualified than others to be teaching that class. But through my credential program, I had not had, and through the multiple subject CSET, it did not rise to the level of knowledge that I was then teaching at those high school level math classes, since we're using that as the example. And I had limited knowledge of teaching secondary students. I'm hopeful that some of that with our new Common Trunk and the gen ed and special ed teachers being prepared together, that there will be more of that, especially focused on our secondary students, because we are keeping these K through 22 credentials. So they really need to know how to teach all of those grade levels when they're leaving their credential program with a preliminary credential.
Yes, Autumn?
Jump in on this point. I'll have a similar experience. So I'm working at my student teaching placement. I work with three fundamentals math 10 classes, so 10th graders. But we're learning systems of equations, and like that's like a 7th, 8th grade math skill, like we're working on slope, intercept form, things like that, getting into compound interest. So even though they're 10th graders, we are at like a 7th, 8th grade level math. Because that's their skill. We're in a fundamentals class. I guess that would be a self-contained or special. It's not. I don't know if I would consider it a special day class. Is that technically a special day class? If it's a fundamentals class, like all the core academics are history, math, English, science. They're all students with IEPs in that class. Okay, so it is like I guess a self-contained class at the high school. But yes, so we're not at like a 10th or 11th or 12th grade level math for those students. I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you. We do have a couple of public comments. And Jenny Teresi, would you please come up?
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Jenny Teresi with the Riverside County Office of Education and also the CTC liaison for the Credentials Networking Subcommittee of PASCO, which is part of CSESA. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Executive Director Mary Sandy was expressing, that, these credentials are designed for a broad range of settings, K through, or pre-K, I guess, through 22, age 22. And these teachers, it is a huge shortage area. These teachers receive a lot of extra training on working with special ed students beyond their program. And there are many wonderful special ed teachers that have English, background or math, or they've taken those CSETs. I just am concerned that shutting off those individuals' access to becoming a special ed teacher is very concerning because of the shortage. And that we know they've got their bachelor's degree and there's they can read and write. And we know they're, have received a certain amount of general education. They can seek out additional training. I would just be concerned about closing off the pipeline and having only a one test only route. So that's my concern, and just want to speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next public comment is Elizabeth. Is it Jara or Hada? Hada.
Good morning.
Okay. Good morning.
So I was on the
Would you
work
please
group.
state your name and your
I'm Elizabeth
affiliation?
Hara, and I'm from Teachers College San Joaquin. I was on the work group for the program standards and the TPEs. I am also a 20-year special education teacher for students with emotional disturbance. So I don't want to complicate matters further, because I am in support of looking at making sure we have multiple opportunities and pathways for our special education teachers to come through. But I also want to be careful with the fact of talking about the baccalaureate degree in preparing our teachers to teach math or to teach English at the high school level. So when we talk about the co-teaching model, especially at the high school level, we have a lot of our teachers that I hear, my interns, are actually more as paraprofessionals within the classroom because of that content knowledge. And I don't know what the right answer is, and this was the conundrum within our work group, but I just want to put a few things out there about that co-teaching model, making sure we have multiple pathways, and then also making sure that our teachers are well prepared in that content area. So didn't have an answer, but I want to make sure we address that.
Thank you. And it looks like we have another public comment coming, but Commissioner Zeppos, did you have something?
Great. So as I look at these options, it seems to me that option 2, since there's benefits and challenges with each, there's not going to be a perfect solution, but it appears, by the way you've laid this out, that option 2 is somewhat of kind of a midpoint of, is that what you all see, and is that what staff would lean towards based on your hearing from various constituents, or am I interpreting that incorrectly?
Yes, and that came up from the work group that we met with too, that the idea of having it be more focused so that the special ed teacher is more in alignment with their general ed counterparts too. So if you're in that K through 6 or K through 8 setting, multiple subject, and if you're at the secondary level and you're delivering instruction, that you have at least one of the 4 content areas as your subject matter competence. The tricky part with that is it's not common. I don't know how common it is, but that you'd be teaching English all day. You might be teaching math and a period of science, or English and social science. So then that sort of speaks to, well, maybe the multiple subject. But yes, option 2 is sort of the one that meets 1 and 3 basically.
You can look at it this way. Option 2 is has more rigor with content, more rigor with the academic content piece. Option 1 provides you the most flexibility for entry into the profession for the ed specialist. Okay. And option 3 provides you the breadth of content exposure. So that's your, those are your choices. All right.
I'm leaning toward all 3 options.
So
okay, let's see. Actually, we have another public comment. Luz Ortega.
Good morning. My name is Luz Ortega. I'm the coordinator of credentials for LAUSD, and I'm here to speak in favor of option 1. I'm going to echo Jenny Tracy's concerns about the teacher shortage, and we'd basically be eliminating half of our potential special ed teacher population by removing, if we go with option 3, by removing all of our single subject credential teachers. And option 2, I mean, we're still doing, not at the same extent, but we're still doing the same thing. We are making it more difficult in order to secure special education teachers for our districts and our students. And speaking with our Division of Special Education, they shared with me that actually some of their best teachers are art teachers that pass the art CSET. Obviously, the single subject areas also, but like Jenny said, there are ways for those single subject teachers to get additional support. So I think we need to keep it open. Otherwise, what's going to end up happening is we're going to end up having to hire more underprepared teachers, more provisional interim permit holders, and so on, instead of having people that can directly go into interim programs where they are getting that support that they need to be in those classrooms. So I really hope that you consider option 1. And once there isn't a teacher shortage in special ed anymore, I mean, the districts can restrict who they hire. So at that point, a district can say, we're only going to hire people with the multiple subject CSET, or we're only going to hire people that meet the requirements of the core academic areas. But I think in the current state of affairs, we do need to keep our options open and just have districts be able to provide that support to the teachers should they need it, have it available to them if they need additional support in gaining access to additional subject areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Klett.
I think why I'm struggling with this so much, it gets back to, and I think I expressed this when we were talking about the common trunk, that the needs of the older students, the high school students, you know, when we thought about doing the grade bands with the common trunk and the teacher shortage, we thought that might not be the most flexible route, so we didn't take that. and I think where I'm struggling with this too is kind of in a similar way that we have high school students who have IEPs, and I think all too often they're not given the same expectations or support to allow them to access A to G courses that would enable them to be able to apply to universities and colleges. And so I feel like they're losing out kind of in both of these situations. We decided not to have the credential, have the grade band that would really address their needs in a more focused way. And I think option 2 and 3, I don't think address that either. And so I'm really struggling with that how do we make sure that for high school students who might not be, they're kind of that middle group with an IEP, that a four-year university would be an option for them, but they don't always have that support or access. And I'm not sure that, I know like if I were to get this credential with my English background and I had to provide support for a student, let's say in chemistry, I don't think I could do that. Now, if I was at a school that had that co-teaching model that was really developed and supported, that might be an option, but I don't. The last item we talked about, there will be a gap. We're doing these things, but there's a gap. A lot of schools haven't developed these models yet. And so I'm just struggling with that. How do we really support those students and make sure that they have access to the higher level classes that would enable them to go to college? So I'm not sure I guess I'm leaning toward option 1 to maintain the flexibility, only because I guess option 2 and 3 to me don't solve the issues that I have concerns about. But I'm still listening.
Thank you. Commissioner Hind?
Thanks. So, I don't like to ever say, let's do this one because it's the best of the worst options. I don't think we're ready, honestly, of these 3 options to make a decision on this. In listening to everyone talking, most people are saying option 1, which is no change, which means that we haven't moved forward at all. It is important, I think, that all teachers have the ability to teach, right? We all want, of these 3 options, it makes sense to have knowledge in like multiple subject areas. But that's also limiting, and it's also more work for our special ed teachers who already have their specialists they know how to teach, they know how to reach the students that have the most severe disabilities. So they already have a full plate of things that they need to learn to do, to teach. When they get up into the high school level, we definitely don't want to limit access to information for those students with special needs. So we don't want to say, I can only teach you up to 8th grade math, so that's the highest you're going to go. So we heard about, and then we just listened to Commissioner Klatt talk about the co-teaching idea and co-teaching model. And that seems like that would offer the most success for all students, the most access for all students. The problem is we don't want the special ed teacher feeling like they are an aide in the classroom. We don't want the general ed teacher feeling like they are an aide in the classroom. Effective co-teaching, we don't really have strong guidelines and models set up before us, but it's something that we can work toward, especially when we're looking at the MTSS and we're moving in that direction. So for me personally, I would be fine not making a decision on this today and maybe thinking more about it and getting more input from the field, from teachers, from our constituent groups, and just really thinking about it because it is a very deep topic and there's a lot of things we can do. We don't want to put something in place that's going to take us steps back. We want to always be moving forward. And if we're going to spend all this time and we're going to end up at the end of the day doing nothing differently, then we haven't moved forward. So I would be in support of not doing anything today, spending more time really not just thinking about it, but throwing out different ideas and finding things that are working, what's not working, what we must have, and what the field says. And of course, any changes that we do end up making, they don't affect teachers who are already teaching, right? So you wouldn't have a special ed credential and then have to go back and take more classes. So that's, something that I think teachers always worry about too. So that's where I'm at with this right now.
If I can make one comment, I just do want to encourage all of you to realize that I just, if you don't make a change, it is okay. It's not that you haven't moved forward, because maybe this is one part of the system that is working on the subject matter piece. So as you think about it, which that's great that you would, consider and think about it. I think that option one with a flexibility, as you've heard from the room, if you do decide to stay with option one, which is what you currently have, although it does provide lots of flexibility, keeping that doesn't mean you haven't moved forward. So so just as you think about that, I don't want you to think that you haven't moved forward just because you've selected that one in the future. Okay, so.
Any other comments, commissioners?
I just want to add one last little anecdote. I'm so excited about like all the MTSS talk and how it's going to be like a systems change and everything. Because I think all too often sometimes, what I've seen with some of my cohort, they will talk about sometimes being that glorified aide in the classroom when they're co-teaching, right? They'll go to different, like for instance, my friend, he's in a high school and he's a co-teaching intern. But he has a caseload of like 18, 19 students. So throughout the day, his caseload's so large, he's like spread way too thin. He's trying to reach across all these classrooms and reach his kids, but he's there only for a short period of time because he's not able to actually, he's having to reach all these kids in order to help them meet their goals and stuff, but it's very hard with the timing factor. So I just want to add that in, that sometimes the co-teach model, like it's so great for the students to be included, but it's hard for the special educators to reach all the students sometimes. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Director Sandy?
I think this has been a very useful next conversation on this topic, and I think the staff is fine putting this forward to the next meeting while you give it more deliberation. One of the things I'm hearing is that there seems to be a tension when we think about the subject matter piece, a tension between the priority that you want the specialist to provide for opening learning pathways for all students and not limiting those learning pathways. Whatever the grade, pre-K through 22, you want the specialist to be able to open access to learning for students. And the subject matter piece, if it's relevant, could limit it if you say their learning science needs to be, equal to their content knowledge so they can be a full deliverer of both those things. We run into the problem where you're a special ed chemistry teacher and we're going to exacerbate the shortage, right? Because if we can't find that, but we do have a special ed biology teacher, well, do we let them teach chemistry because they aren't subject matter verified? I mean, that becomes a situation that is more complex to monitor and not necessarily helpful. But I'm hearing that you'd like us to continue to work toward the balance that students are given access to learning opportunity here at the fullest extent possible. And co-teaching, as you've suggested, without it becoming paraprofessional work. And in really good co-teaching situations, it is absolutely not that. There are multiple adults in the room and they are all working with students productively. We've seen that. But in a co-teaching, you might be able to augment the absence of a particular subject matter at the level. You just don't want the teacher to limit the students' access to the content at that level. And that's what I'm taking away from this. Are you hearing that too? Yeah? Okay. So we, I think, can come back at the next meeting with this, and this is helpful to the whole enterprise.
Absolutely. This was a great conversation, and again, it dovetailed nicely from the MTSS presentation, and I think that for me, as I read this and then listened to the conversation, I felt very hopeful about a systems change. And, going back to when we started talking about this a few years ago, the expectation with the local control funding formula and the multiple measures is that we want our students who are in special ed to be college and career ready. And as I was looking at this and thinking about this, it occurred to me that I really want the teacher to be an advocate, right? And to go to the general ed classroom where their student is in and say, my student is really struggling in your math class. and what do we need to do to get them there, and the co-teaching model also, without having to be something that changes at every district level, from an excellent model to paraprofessional or glorified aid. So thank you for this, and we'll move on to our next item, which is 3F, Teacher Supply in California, 2016-2017. And I'll give you a few minutes to get settled there, or a minute. Yeah, okay. All right, that was enough. A report to the Legislature. This item is being presented by Marjorie Suko and Fifi Lau. This is an information action item. Ms. Suko, will you please begin?
I'll start the presentation when she's trying to bring the dashboard. Agenda item 3F is an action item titled Teacher Supply in California. Once approved, the report will be transmitted to the Governor and Legislature by April 15th. All summary tables are presented within this agenda item, and detailed tables are presented in the appendix. The appendix is available on the website, which is more than 400 pages long, and you can access the appendix by clicking the link on page 2. At this time, we'll go over highlights from the 16-17 report. Why do we do teacher supply report every year? The annual reporting of teacher supply came out of Assembly Bill 471, and as per Education Code 44225.6, we have to report on the following: number and type of multiple subject, single subject, education specialist credential, recommended by IHE, and alternative certification pathways. This will be our intern programs. Number of initial credential based on completion outside of California by type and authorization. These are credentials issued to teachers who are trained out of country and out of state. Number of emergency permit, credential waiver, or other authorizations. Number of certificate of completion of staff development issued pursuant to Education Code 44253.10. Number of intern credential permits and waivers by county and district and subject, and percentage of total teachers statewide. Number of credentials recommended by Commission Accreditation Teacher Preparation Program segments. This dashboard shows the overall number of new credentials issued in 16-17. As you can see, there are 4 stacked bars. The first stacked bar, that is the total number of new credentials issued by 3 different credential types. We issued more than 16,000 in 16-17. As I hover over, you can see the tan bar is the number of multiple subject. We issued about 7,000 credentials in multiple subject. This accounts for 42% of our total document. Then the blue bar, that is another 6,300 credentials in single subject, are about 38%. And the remaining 3,300 in education specialists, which accounts for 20%. Moving on to the second stacked bar, that's the number of intern credentials issued. We issued more than 4,300 in 16-17. Here again, the distribution is we had 1,300 at 30% in multiple subject, another 1,300 in single subject at 29%, and the remainder 1,800 in education specialists, that accounts for 41%. Moving on to the third bar, that is the number of permits issued. This includes PIPs, STIPs, and limited assignment. We issued more than 7,500 documents in this category. 2,100 are 28% in multiple subject, about 2,900 are 38% in single subject, 2,500 in education specialists accounts for 33%. The last is a tiny bar. It's the number of total waivers issued. We issued 405 in 16-17. And the distribution is 23% in multiple subject, 35% in single subject, and 42% in education specialist. How do these numbers look like when we take a look at a statewide picture? According to the California Department of Education, there are more than 300,000 teachers teaching in the K-12 public schools in 16-17. And as I mentioned, we had 4,300 in intern credential. That translates to 1.5%. Then we had 7,500 permits. That accounts for 2.6% statewide. And waivers, 405, translates to less than 1%. So when we add all those intern permits and waivers, it accounts for about 4.2% of employed teachers holding an intern or permit or waiver document. So that means 96 of employed teachers, they hold a preliminary or clear credential statewide. Now we are trying to dice and slice the data by pathways and credential type and segments. This line graph shows the three different pathways by which an individual can get a credential. The top blue line, that is the IHE prepared. As you can see, every year they produce about 12,000 documents. They produce the highest proportion of credentials, about 70 to 80% each year. That's a little bit of a downward trend the middle years, but again, it's about 12,000 in 16-17. Between 15-16 and 16-17, that's an increase of about 5.8%. The middle line, that is the number of credentials issued to out-of-state prepared. That's a steady upward trend. And between 15-16 and 16-17, there was an increase of 4.6%. The bottom blue line, that's the district prepared. Here again, a steady upward trend. It's a smaller chunk. And then between 15-16 and 16-17, it was an increase of 64.3%. So overall, there was an increase in all three pathways. In this dashboard, we are giving the number of credentials by credential type. On the left-hand side, you have the total number of credentials issued, and the right-hand side, we have the number of intern credentials. As you can see, for multiple subjects, there is a steady upward trend, both for initial credential as well as for the intern credentials. Single subject showed a little bit of a dip in 13-14, but for the last 3 years, steady upward trend. Similar pattern, steady upward trend in intern credentials. Education specialists showed a little bit of a fluctuation, both for initial credential as well as for intern credential. Every time there is a red dot or red line, that indicates it's a decline. In this dashboard, we are showing the number of credentials issued by segments. As you can see, for CSU, UC, and private independent institutions, there was a little bit of a fluctuation in 13-14 and 14-15, but for the past 2 years, for all segments, there has been an upward trend. LEA showed a little bit of a dip in 14-15. Here again, upward trend in 15-16 and 16-17. As I mentioned earlier, there's a steady upward trend for out-of-state trained teachers. For interns, upward trend for CSU, independent, and LEAs. There's a little bit of a small dip for UC. For all type of documents, credentials, waivers, permits, and we showed them by subject area in our dashboards. For this dashboard, we are focusing on the teacher shortage areas such as math, science, and special education. The gray bars, they indicate the number of credentials, and the orange line indicates the number of interns, permits, and waivers issued in that subject. As you can see, for math, we issued about 1,500 documents in 12-13, steady decline, and then in 16-17, we issued a little more than 1,000 documents. During the same time frame, the number of interns, permits, and waivers increased from 352 to 800, more than doubled. The next set of data is for the science. The numbers kind of look similar to math. We issued 1,600 documents in 12-13, a little bit of a decline, but the decline is not as severe as in math. We issued 1,400 in 16-17. Again, during the same time frame, the number of interns, permits, and waivers, it's doubled. It's 417, and it is 953 in 16-17. For educational specialists, we had 3,800 issued in 12-13, and down to 3,400 in 16-17. Here, the number of interns, permits, and waivers showed a dramatic increase. We had 2,200 5 years ago. By midpoint, the number of interns, permits, and waivers can outpace the number of new credentials issued.
To ensure that teachers have specialized knowledge and skills to support English learners in the classrooms, the Commission has updated standards to embed English learner instruction in teaching preparation programs. However, teachers who hold a designated subjects career technical education or CTE credential prior to the adoption of the new 2008 standards are required to hold a certificate of completion of staff development, or in short, CCSD, to provide SEDI instruction. Completion of the prior 2008 standards program was on August 31st, 2013, diminishing the number of CTE issuances without SEDI authorization. As the data show, it is not surprising to see the number of CCSD issuances continue to decrease in the future as the current CTE credential with the SEDI authorization is being issued. English learner authorization is one of the credential requirements to become a fully credentialed teacher. However, not all schools are able to find and employ fully credentialed teachers. When a fully credentialed teacher is not available, schools can employ an individual who holds an intern credential, permit, or waiver. An intern program is an alternative credential pathway where intern credential holders are employed in the K-12 classroom to provide instruction while completing credential requirements. As a result, intern credential issuances as well as permits and waivers imply a demand for fully credentialed teacher. On this dashboard, we can see the last 5 years of issuances for interns, permits, and waivers. There's been a steady increase for both intern and permits for the last 5 years, but a decline in 2014-15 for waivers, but an increase in the last 2 years. When looking at the different types of interns, on the right bar graph in blue, the data showed that there were more education specialists interns issued than multiple subject and single subject. There were also more university interns issued than district interns. When looking at the different permit types, on the right bar graph in red, the data show that there were more single subject permits issued compared to multiple subject and education specialists, and they were specifically in limited assignments, which is the lightest shade in red. When we look at PIPs and STIPs, we can see that there are more multiple subject and education specialists issued. However, overall, there were more permits issued in single subject. As for waivers, on the right bar graph in yellow, we can see that there have been an increase of education specialist waivers in the last 5 years compared to multiple subject and single subject. So what does the data tell us? Interns and permits were mostly issued in special ed, while permits were mostly issued in single subject. Now let's find out where these interns, permits, and waivers were issued. On this dashboard, the maps on the left and in the middle provide data on the number of intern permit and waiver issuances. The color legends below indicate that the darkest blue on the left shows the least number of intern permits and waivers issued, while the darkest orange on the right shows where the most were issued. The greatest total number of intern permits and waivers issued in a region implies that there was a high need for fully credentialed teacher in that location. On the left map, we can see the total number of issuances in the last 5 years combined. And on the middle map, we can see the issuances for 2016-17. When comparing the last 5 years and the issuances in 2016-17, we can see that there hasn't been too much of a difference. Most of the interns, permits, and waivers were teaching, and waiver holders were teaching in the South Coast and Bay Area regions. The map on the far right shows the total number of K-12 enrollment for 2016-17. The data was provided by the California Department of Education. The map shows that the largest K-12 enrollment is in the South Coast and Bay Area, which seems to correspond to the number of interim permit and waiver issuances, but with a difference between South San Joaquin, Central Valley, and Inland Empire. Let's look at the issuances for multiple subjects teaching credential. The data show that most of the interim permit and waiver holders were not teaching in the South Coast region. Instead, they were mostly teaching in the Bay Area and South San Joaquin Central Valley. Looking deeper by county in the Bay Area for the last 5 years, and also for 2016-17, we can see based on the color that in 2016-17, there were more multiple subjects interim permit and waivers issued in Contra Costa compared to the last 5 years. And there's a steady need of fully credentialed teachers in Santa Clara and Alameda. Let's also look at the Bay Area for K-12 enrollment. We can see that for Santa Clara, Alameda, and Contra Costa have the largest K-12 enrollment in the Bay Area region. So what made the data tell us? The need for fully credentialed teachers remained fairly consistent by region and county for the last 5 years, and the need seems to correspond with the number of K-12 students in the area. To summarize, in 2016-17, there has been an increase of new teaching credential in all credential areas, pathways, and segments. There was also an increase of the number of interns, permits, and waivers, but the total accounts for about 4% of employed teachers in 2016-17. All of the Commission's data presented up till this point are available on the Commission website. Since this marks the 20th year of the Teacher Supply Report, we want to give you a picture of the 20-year trend of new credentials issued. So on this dashboard, the top bar graph starting with 1997-98 will display the number of new credentials issued by California prepared and out-of-state prepared pathways. The bottom graph will display the new credentials issued by credential name, with the top tan color being multiple subject, the middle gray color being single subject, and the bottom brown color being education specialists. As you can see, there was a big dip in 2002-03, as well as in 2004 and 5 until 2014-15, where we start to see an increase. On the credential line graph on the bottom, we can see for multiple subject that in 1997-98, there were about 13,000 new multiple subject credentials issued. In 2016-17, there were about 7,000 new multiple subjects credentials issued. For single subject in the middle line, we can see that there was a dip in 2002-03, which is also true for multiple subject, and an increase in 2014-15. And for education specialists, which is the bottom line, we can see that there was a steady number of issuances in the last 20 years. And that concludes our presentation. We are happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we do have a public comment. Rigel Massaro?
Good morning, Commissioners. Rigel Massaro with Public Advocates. This is such a wealth of data. I've only delved in not as many hours as I should, and I'm by no means a data expert. I really appreciate putting together the report and the dashboards. I especially appreciate that last graph, and I would suggest that be included in your report to the legislature, because
the graph that is there on one of the early pages, sort of suggests that we're just middling along around the 15,000 mark, and that's not the reality. 10 years ago, new credentials, instead of in the 15,000s, were 24,000, and 15 years ago it was 29,000. And so for them to understand that with the recession, we need to have a really strong approach, and we haven't seen that from the state. And so I do feel it's imperative the commission provide that information. I don't know how much they know in the building about the data dashboards, but that information is critical. If we continue on our current trajectory between last year and this year of a growth of about 6.8%, we'll get back to 10 years ago marks in like 6 years, but that's not the kind of growth we want. We want growth of fully credentialed teachers. We don't want the growth of permit holders and interns. We want to rely on California grown teachers. And that increase it is smaller than 6.8%. So we really need to shift our approach in a dramatic fashion. And I do feel it is the CTC has a real role in lifting up that need. Also just want to highlight how this data has a disproportionate effect. We're a civil rights organization. This is a civil rights issue. This data disproportionately affects, as described, special education students, English learners, high need students. The breakdown by region is fabulous. And if you break down even further, it gets worse. So if you delve into Santa Clara County, you might imagine there's a difference between the east side of San Jose, which is 90% high need students, and Palo Alto. There are huge differences, and I would really encourage everyone to delve into those 433 pages, do a quick Google search, a quick find for your district and your county office, and really delve into those numbers. It's rich information, although it's not for charter schools. We don't have any of that information. So I just would really encourage an equity view, which I know this body has, but I'm saying it to remind us and to, where possible, insert that information into the report that we do present to the legislature, that there needs to be swift and aggressive action taken, targeting our highest need students who are suffering the brunt of this shortage. I have a few other questions, which I'll surface to you all offline, but thank you so much for this report, and let's keep up the good work. I guess I also want to add that I would love the CTC to examine what it can do administratively. There are differences, in my view, between interns and between permit holders. So for instance, we put a lot of effort into a new permit a few years ago, which has much more robust preparation and mentorship requirements than some other permits do. Interns are better prepared and supported around English learners than they are for students with disabilities. And my understanding is there are different requirements for district versus IHE interns with regard to the support they get for students with disabilities. So these are things I think that the commission can look at and do something about here to better prepare those high numbers of underprepared teachers that we're putting in to teach our highest need students. Thank you.
Thank you. Having no other public comments, do commissioners have any questions or comments on this issue? Commissioner Zeppos?
I want to compliment you on such a thorough and rich report, and also to highlight what was just stated in the public comment, because especially the private nonprofits, and we're pleased to see that we still have 43% of the educator workforce we're preparing in these areas. But with the interns, that is a large population that we're producing as well, and there is a significant difference between the interns and the PIPs and STIPs. And I know with the AICCU deans that I've spoken with that do have a large population of interns, we provide extensive support at the cost of the university. And so that wasn't always the case in past years. There was additional support, but then that was pulled. And so just to recognize in this supply report, or at least for consideration in the future, that the additional support to ensure that they're highly qualified in receiving the mentoring and extensive support is often at the cost of the universities. And so there may be something that we want to look at with district providers to ensure that that same kind of support is being provided. And then also that many, just to also highlight why there is the intern spike, often we start them in the traditional programs, but then they're hired by districts, and so they turn into interns because of the shortage areas. And so that does shift over time of what they initially intended to do, and then the employer then hires them. So having that pathway does shift over time. So those are just my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Klatt?
Thank you. There's so much information here. So I'm going to ask a question and it might be in here and I missed it. So I apologize if I did. I was looking at figure 16, which shows the average age of credential holders. And it looks like it's somewhere in the 30s. But I'm wondering do you have any other information that could describe a little bit more of the distribution of those ages? Is that the case? I guess what I'm wondering, do we have many older and many younger teachers, or do we just have a lot in the middle? Do you have access to that?
I think the big difference we saw was by the credential type as well as by the district intern programs. Multiple subject and single subject, there was not much variation because they stayed around 31 and 32 average age. Whereas as you see, the education specialists, invariably they are in the older group. And the next time we can even show the distribution instead of doing it. Okay. Mm-hmm.
I guess that would be helpful, I think, because as I think about supply and demand, I guess looking at how many of these credential holders are nearing the age of retirement and how many still have a ways to go, I think would be helpful.
I just wanted to highlight how we are finally seeing an uptick of people going into the profession, which is great. I know a lot of teachers a lot of people who had wanted to be teachers earlier on in their life pulled away from education because there weren't jobs and teachers were being pink slipped who had been tenured teachers and who'd been in school districts for 10 or more years. So it wasn't a profession that was attracting a lot of people. So it is good to see that that's changing. And I hope that the new governor, whoever that ends up being, has the same commitment to public education as Governor Brown has shown us. And I think that with that commitment to public education, we will continue to see it, and hopefully we will get back to those numbers quicker than what Rigel had pointed out. And I really appreciated also what Rigel was saying regarding those most at-risk students receiving an education from the least qualified teachers. And I was talking to a professor at CSUMB who's also a principal in Salinas, and he was telling me that when he took on the role of principal in his school, there were, I think, 12 teachers and 9 of them were not credentialed. So those are the most at-risk students in that area, and most of them didn't have a teacher who was credentialed. So keeping that focus on fully credentialed teachers and that focus on funding public education is going to get us back to those numbers and get all of our students' needs met. So thank you.
Director Sand.
I'm just I don't want to circumscribe any of this conversation. I just want to be mindful that we probably have a half an hour before we're going to lose our quorum. And so word to the wise.
Commissioner Sloan?
I'll make a quick comment then. Thank you for this presentation. The graphics especially are so enlightening. I've been looking at these reports for the last almost 10 years, and having the additional information now that we have with our data dashboards is just fabulous. So I hope that the presentation will be available, but is there those additional graphics that you provided, will they be available?
Most of the slides we showed, they are already on our education to supply landing pages. But as we do more of this trend analysis, we are thinking maybe creating another web page or dashboards, and we can start publishing trend analysis.
Great, thank you. Then my other comment was just to build on our public comment from Rigel Massaro, who so eloquently described some of the things that we should be paying attention to. And one of the things being, if we can pay attention now to strengthening the preparation of our underprepared teachers, as Commissioner Zeppos also talked about, would be something for us to focus on. And the other thing is, and we've been talking about this for a while, but developing policies to support high quality preparation in this time of shortage. We've talked a lot about residencies and how that can work. And we have information from other places. Recently, Bank Street College had the Sustainable Funding Project where they were really looking at over a 5-year period of time, how can we sustain residencies so that not any one organization is responsible. And I think in California, what's happened is our shortage has happened so quickly that people are scrambling right now at this moment in time. And that may be why we're seeing this tremendous uptick in STIPs and PIPs. But we could be, and we are, I think, developing ideas that have to be local options and partnerships between districts and preparation providers. And what is CTC's role in that? Well, one thing that we have been doing and probably can continue to do is inform the field about what things are happening out there. Another is that we already do have some policies where we encourage partnerships, and we should continue to. All of our policies around developing new programs that require that school districts and IHE partners work together. For instance, in Induction. And we're seeing new induction programs popping up everywhere. Seems like a really great intersection between IHEs and districts. And if we can continue to think about how our policies can support and require those kinds of partnerships to develop some of these new ways of preparing our teachers. Lastly, I would say another approach is to let practice drive policy. If we can really start developing these local partnerships and researching what's happening as we develop these practices, and then having those come back to the commission. And it's something that we are trying to do in California now with this California Teacher Education Research and Improvement Network that is involving both the University of California, the independent colleges, and the CSUs. And we're just getting started, but it is another way that I think we can all work together to help inform this important work. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And this is an information action item. The recommended action is that the Commission approve the Teacher Supply in California 2016-2017 report for transmittal to the Governor and Legislature. Do I have such a motion? All right. Do I have a second? Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and we'll vote. All those in favor? Is there anyone opposed? Okay, so motion passes. Thank you, Dr. Sugo and Ms. Lau, for a very extensive, informative report. And having no additional items, I adjourn the Educator Preparation Committee.
Thank you, Commissioner Rodriguez. Next, we have the Legislative Committee. Item 6A is status of legislation. This is an information item. Joshua Speaks will present this item. Mr. Speaks, will you please begin?
Thank you, Commissioners. Good morning. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we are in the legislative session. And given that I know that we only have a quorum for a brief time, I'm going to try to make my presentation here brief. The legislative session opened this year on January 3rd. At this point, all new bills have been introduced. There are still some ways, like through committees, that new legislation may be introduced. But at this point, we're really, for the most part, looking at what we're going to be dealing with for the rest of the year. Policy committees have until April 27th to move bills that have a fiscal impact, so that the fiscal committees will have time to look at those bills and consider them appropriately. So we're getting into the point here where we're actually starting to see a significant amount of action. Now you've got a pretty lengthy list of legislation on this item. I'm not going to go over every piece of that because, again, I know that we're somewhat short on time. But there are a few bills that I wanted to highlight because if you'll recall, when I came up in February, Really, we only had the 2-year bills listed because at that point the legislature was still introducing bills. In fact, at that point, our sponsored bills had not yet been introduced as legislation. So with that, I would just like to highlight, first of all, our 2 sponsored pieces of legislation that the Commission has proposed for this year. The first one is AB 3048 by Assemblymember Irwin, and that is our assignment monitoring bill. That is scheduled to be heard on April 21st or 25th in the Assembly Education Committee. And that's the bill that would modernize the assignment monitoring process by automating large portions of it. It's a very complicated bill with a lot of moving parts, and to that end, we've had stakeholder discussions. We've got a wide variety of stakeholders who've been giving us input and improving the bill with their perspectives, and we find that really valuable, and we're thankful for them participating with us so readily on that. And so we've made some amendments to the bill. We're getting that language introduced so that it'll be available for the committee to consider. And we're discussing additional amendments with our stakeholders. And in fact, the California Teachers Association has taken a formal oppose unless amended position on the bill, but they have shared their thoughts on amendments with us, and we have agreed to those in principle. At this point, it's just a matter of getting them drafted and submitted to Leg Council. Then our second bill is SB 1383. It's a Senate bill by Senator Fuller, and that is the bill that would make some alterations to the membership of the Committee of Credentials in order to help that body deal with the workload that they've been encountering, the increases that they've been seeing over the past few years. And that bill is scheduled to be heard in the Senate Education Committee on April 18th. CTA is also engaged with us on that bill, and they've recommended some amendments there as well. In fact, I have a meeting with a representative from CTA this afternoon to discuss their amendments with them, so we're trying to work with them on that as well. In addition to that, we have just a couple of pieces of legislation that I wanted to highlight. The first is on page 3 of your item, and it's AB 2186 by Assemblymember Thurman. And one thing I want to highlight before I get into specific legislation actually is that what you'll see is that the majority of bills that we're looking at this year are teacher supply bills, various ideas about how to deal with the teacher supply issues we're seeing in California. Now, obviously, we would love to be in a situation where we had as many teachers as we need, they're all fully qualified, and no one has to worry about this, but I think it's a really good sign that the legislature is engaging so seriously with this problem and that they are coming up with ideas. Obviously, we don't expect to see all of these ideas ultimately pass into law, but I think that they're really taking this issue seriously. And I think, we saw at our last meeting that the governor is also taking it seriously with what he's proposed. And so I think that's an encouraging sign for us. So having said that, Assemblymember Thurman has a bill that has quite a few moving pieces to it. It's basically a variety of grant programs aimed at the teaching workforce here in California. And two of them that I wanted to highlight are $50 million for a STEM teacher residency program and $50 million for a STEM local solutions grant program. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because it mirrors the proposal that the governor made in his January budget proposal, except that it's focusing on STEM rather than special ed. Now, we have heard some rumors that he may be thinking about changing that, and instead of putting together a series of grant programs for special ed, he may instead be looking at using those funds instead to provide more support for residency programs in general, instead of targeting one specific area. We haven't seen any language on that yet, so either way, it's encouraging to see that they're looking into encouraging more recruitment into the teaching workforce. Another bill I wanted to highlight is the next one below that on our list, AB 2285 by Assemblymember O'Donnell. That bill is sort of humming along. It just passed the Appropriations Committee recently, and so now it's being considered on the Assembly floor. And essentially what that bill is doing is it's trying to remove some barriers to recruiting teachers from out of state. And so it is removing the 150-hour requirement that teachers who come into California and receive a preliminary credential based on an out-of-state credential, they currently have to complete 150 hours of professional development or have earned a master's degree. This bill would eliminate that requirement so that they would be able to obtain a clear credential, by satisfying the rest of the California standards that in-state teachers have to satisfy as well. It would also allow teachers who were issued a preliminary California credential based on an out-of-state credential and still need to fulfill their English learner requirement to fulfill that by taking an in-state preparation program. Currently, if you have a credential from out of state that's led to a California credential and you need English learner training in order to clear that credential, and then you go and complete a California program, say you want to add a second credential, like a special ed or something like that, even though there's English learner training embedded in your California program, that English learner training that's already embedded doesn't clear your out-of-state credential. And so this bill would say, hey, if it's good enough for a California teacher prep program, then it's good enough to clear your out-of-state credential as well. So those were the two bills that I primarily wanted to highlight. Like I said, there's a lot more bills in this list, and I'm more than happy to answer questions about any other bills that the Commission may be interested in hearing about.
Thank you so much. I have two public comment cards. The first is Danette Brown. Can you please state your name and affiliation for the record?
Thank you. Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. And I wanted to speak specifically to AB 3048. And I was very pleased to hear Mr. Speaks talk about that continuing dialogue that has been going on with the stakeholders. And I wanted to just share a little bit behind our rationale for our opposed position that we took at just last weekend at our CTA State Council of Education meeting. CTA believes that in order to reduce the misassignment of teachers, California should establish a single annual reporting system of all teacher assignments and credentials for all schools receiving public funds in California through an independent standards board. And so our concern, and really why we took that opposed position, is we understand 1 in 10 students to be enrolled in charter schools. And we would like any school who receives public funds to participate in this monitoring. So we felt that that was really important to give us a more comprehensive picture of misassignments in the state. And like I said, we are looking forward to seeing the new draft language that is coming out of these conversations, and we'll stay tuned. Thank you.
Thank you, Danette. Next, we have Rigel Massaro. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Rigel Massaro with Public Advocates, again on AB 3048. I just really want to acknowledge and thank Joshua Speaks and Roxanne Perdue, Aaron Scoble, and Aaron Henderson for their tremendous work and on this bill, and really reaching out to everyone, and even called me before I called them once. It was amazing. So I definitely, we're definitely very much in support of the recommendation made by CTA. As well as we're trying to, we hope to be having a support position at the hearing in a couple weeks, looking to really ensure that the data around misassignments is available to community stakeholders in their yearly LCAP process. So that's an important piece that we got to figure out, and also ensuring that the Commission maintains the authority that it has now to support and target districts where there are persistent misassignments. Those are kind of two remaining issues for us, where I think that given the stakeholder conversations, we're going to be able to get to a good solution. So again, appreciative of staff, and thank you, and we'll be in support hopefully in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Commissioners, do you have questions or comments? Seeing none, this is an information item, so no action is needed. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaks. And this concludes the business before the Legislative Committee. The committee is now adjourned. I'd like to reconvene the general session and move to agenda item 2J, interview, recommendation, and appointment of members for the Committee on Accreditation. The ad hoc committee recommends the appointment of Kathy Creasia, Katrine Jakowski, and Cynthia Amos to serve as members on the Committee of Accreditation effective July 1st, 2018. The committee also recommends J. Kevin Taylor, James Webb, and Kelly Scon be appointed as alternates for the Committee on Accreditation. If there are any members of the ad hoc committee who wish to share their perspective from the interviews, they can do so now. Okay, Commissioner Rodriguez.
Just wanted to share that the interviews were incredibly enlightening, energizing, and educating. And it was a pleasure to serve on the ad hoc committee.
Thank you. We appreciate your work. So I move the commission accept the recommendations of the ad hoc committee. Do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Escobedo. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Next is agenda item 2K, report of the closed session agenda. Staff briefed the commission on the case of Kathleen Carroll versus CTC and no reportable action was taken. Staff briefed the commission on the DFEH matter and no reportable action was taken. The commission granted the following petitions for reinstatement. Kelly Butler, Mark Cohen. The commission denied the following petitions for reinstatement. Kelly Marshall, Kent Powell, Shane Sabi, Warren Thomas, Kathy Wu. The commission vacated the default decision and order in the matter of Constance Phillips and granted an administrative hearing. The commission adopted the following proposed decisions. Miriam Aguilar Escobar, Michelle Chevalier, Daniel Jolene. The commission adopted the following decisions and orders. Paul Dahl, Maria Reyes. The commission granted reconsideration in the matter of Kylan Alberto Pratt and granted an administrative hearing. The commission granted the following requests for reconsideration and remanded the matters back to the Committee of Credentials. Stephen Harrington, Eric Hernandez, Ina Rocklin. The commission granted the following requests for reconsideration and sustained its previous decisions. James Cathy III, Gabriel Galland, Peter Hefner, Lamar Sally, Beth Strahl, Abraham Wolfinger. The commission discussed consent calendar item number 53, Rita McCarran, and accepted the recommendation of the Committee on Credentials. Commissioner Kung recused himself from number 18, Aaron Castro, and Commissioner Escobedo recused herself from number 158, Halden Culvert. Item 2L is new business. The bi-monthly agenda is presented for information. Are there any audience presentations? Ooh, it's getting exciting. I have two. Or are you coming together? Separate? Two separate audience presentations. The first is Danette Brown.
Danette Brown, representing the California Teachers Association. On December 20th, in this very room, we had the best meeting talking about the RECA. And there were so many incredibly intelligent and motivated and passionate people in that room. And we spent all day, even though it was December 20th, just kind of mulling around some questions about the RECA. At this very meeting, you approved the minutes, the February minutes, which list all of the public comment. And many of those people who made public commentary, including myself, were at that December 20th meeting. And I would really like to encourage you to revisit those minutes and read the comments, the public comments, because when I look at those public comments, I was like, yes, look at how many people are excited about this work, and look at how many people really acknowledge that the RECA as it stands right now is an outdated assessment that is not serving our teacher candidates. And we as an association have concern that that's not, we haven't heard anything. Our phone hasn't been ringing. I don't see it on any agenda items. We just feel like maybe it's been put on a back burner. Maybe our invitation got lost in the mail. I'm not sure where that topic is at. Our members and our student CTA members have really been clear about the RECA as it stands being a barrier for teacher candidates coming into the profession. And as we look at the teacher shortage and what the work that we need to do around that, we feel like RECA is an important part of that. So I'm here today to ask for you to consider, we know it's a complex issue. It was clear that day it's a complex issue. There's no easy fix. But usually on topics that are a little more complex, we're able to put our minds together in a collaborative effort, whether it's called a work group or a focus group or a study something, any of those names that pertain to keep this topic moving forward in a positive direction so that we can do best by our students. So we respectfully request that a work group be convened or that work continues so that we can address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Next, we have Harold Acord. Please state your name and affiliation for the record.
Hello, my name is Harold Acord, and I am speaking on behalf of the more than 300,000 members of the California Teachers Association. Today I have something very serious to share with you, and I want to give a little background about the entity that took the action that I'm going to share with you. The California Teachers Association was founded around 155 years ago, and we have had a State Council of Education that has been meeting since the 1880s. I'm a member of that council. There are about 800 or so individuals that represent and are directly elected by the 300,000 plus members of our association. We are the majority of people who hold credentials through this body. At the most recent California Teachers Association State Council of Education, a very serious MBI was brought up. An MBI is a new business item, and I want to let you know that the MBI that I'm going to share with you was passed unanimously by those 800 individuals at the State Council of Education. CTA is calling upon Refugio Ref Rodriguez to resign from the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing. He is facing felony charges on various issues, and he is also facing some misdemeanor counts in addition. He, most recently, what's happened was on March 16th, he was arrested for public intoxication at the Yard House in Pasadena. This is a serious issue for us because we believe that our independent standards board, the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing, the entity who votes yes or no on whether we can keep our credential based on actions that we may have taken, needs to be beyond reproach. So we are publicly asking, even though he is not here today, Refugio Ref Rodriguez to resign from the California Commission on Teacher Credentialing. His actions while he's here, the votes that he takes, call into question the appropriateness of being able to vote on such a thing when someone is facing charges like this. It's not appropriate, and we hope that he will take the appropriate action by resigning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Acord. Having no further public presentations, I now adjourn the April 2018 meeting of the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. The next meeting is June 14th and 15th. Have safe travels.